I reject you, Elara Vale. A mute Omega will never stand beside me as Luna. Alpha Mason Carter's voice struck the stone walls of Moon Hall like a hammer, and the silence that followed cut even deeper than the words themselves. Hundreds of wolves stared as Elara remained frozen beneath the silver skylight, her long brown hair stirred by a wind that should not have existed inside the ancient chamber. Then every torch surrounding the moon altar flickered blue at once. A low vibration rolled beneath the polished floor, subtle enough for most to mistake it for distant thunder, yet strong enough to make dust drift from the ceiling. Gasps rippled through the crowd before cruel laughter quickly buried them. Mason stepped back as though merely standing near her had become an embarrassment. Look at her, someone whispered. She cannot even defend herself. Elara tried. She opened her mouth, desperate to explain that she had never chosen silence, that every word she tried to speak tore through her throat like invisible glass. Only a strained breath escaped her lips. A few children lowered their eyes. Their parents did not. Members of the Silver Creek Council nodded with quiet approval, treating the rejection as if it had restored order to the pack. Elara lowered her gaze before anyone could see the tears gathering in her pale green eyes. She refused to give them the satisfaction of watching them fall. The bond that had once promised a future dissolved into an aching emptiness inside her chest, but something else moved through the hall as well. It was older than the pack, older than the carved wolf statues surrounding the altar. Hidden beneath the noise, an almost forgotten pulse answered her pain. Outside, black clouds swallowed the afternoon sun although no storm had been forecast. At that exact moment, another convoy entered the courtyard. Black vehicles bearing the royal crest rolled to a quiet stop. Every guard immediately straightened. Rowan Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, stepped from the lead vehicle with measured calm, his gray-blue eyes scanning the gathering before anyone could announce his arrival. He had intended only to observe the ceremony before continuing to the western frontier. Instead, the strange vibration beneath his boots made him pause. Across the crowded hall, Elara pressed one trembling hand against the cracked stone beside the altar. Barely louder than a breath, she forced out 4 fragile words. The Western Seal, breaking. The effort sent sharp pain through her throat, but the whisper carried farther than it should have. No one reacted. No one except Rowan. His head turned instantly toward the broken Omega. For one impossible heartbeat, the noise of the entire hall disappeared. He had heard every single word. Rowan did not move for several long seconds. Around him, royal guards and pack officials bowed in greeting, waiting for the formal exchange required whenever the Alpha King visited a regional territory. He acknowledged them with a slight nod, but his attention remained fixed on the young woman standing alone beside the moon altar. Elara's breathing was uneven. The pain in her throat still burned from forcing out those impossible words, yet another sensation pulled harder at her instincts. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the ceiling where silver runes circled the massive dome. Every moon hall was protected by ancient wards woven into the stone generations earlier. They glowed so faintly that most wolves never noticed them. Elara noticed them because she always had. Today, nearly half of those delicate lines had faded into darkness. One after another, tiny threads of pale light disappeared like stars before dawn. Her pulse quickened. The wards were failing. She hurried toward the nearest council elder, grabbing a tablet from a nearby registration desk. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen before she turned it around. The wards are shutting down. Please check the Western Ring. The elder barely glanced at the message before sighing in annoyance. Enough. The ceremony is over. Go home before you embarrass yourself again. He handed the tablet back without another look. Elara tried another official. Then another. Some ignored her completely. Others assumed grief had clouded her judgment after Mason's rejection. A few exchanged sympathetic smiles that somehow felt worse than open cruelty. None of them looked up. None of them noticed another silver rune quietly fading above their heads. Across the hall, Rowan watched every movement. It was not panic he saw in her expression. It was calculation. She kept counting the ceiling stones, the pillars, the glowing symbols, as though assembling a puzzle only she could see. That alone made him curious. His chief advisor stepped beside him. "Your Majesty, the welcoming luncheon has been prepared." Rowan did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a different question. "Who maintains the protective wards here?" The advisor blinked in surprise. "The local wardens, Your Majesty. They inspect them every month." Rowan looked back toward the ceiling. "Then they have missed something." Before the advisor could respond, every light fixture inside Moon Hall dimmed for the briefest instant. The electronic displays around the entrance flickered. Several guests looked up in confusion before the power stabilized again. Most laughed it off as a minor electrical fault. Elara did not laugh. She stared directly toward the western wall where the oldest stone archway stood in complete silence. There, hidden inside the shadow of a cracked pillar, a single ancient rune went completely dark. The brief flicker passed, and conversation slowly returned to the hall, but the unease inside Elara only deepened. She watched another pale line vanish from the western arch, and instinct told her the ancient protection surrounding Moon Hall was unraveling one thread at a time. Before she could warn anyone again, Mason strode toward her, every step fueled by wounded pride. "You have caused enough disruption for one day," he said loudly, making certain nearby guests heard every word. "Leave this ceremony. You are no longer welcome in Silver Creek's sacred hall." Several pack members stepped aside to clear a path, not out of respect, but to distance themselves from the rejected Omega. Elara lowered her eyes and obeyed without protest. She had spent years surviving by choosing silence over argument. As she crossed the marble floor, a small laugh echoed from the western corridor. A little boy, no older than 7, chased a glowing paper wolf while his distracted parents greeted royal officials. The toy drifted beyond a velvet barrier toward the oldest section of the hall where the faded runes rested almost invisible beneath carved stone. Elara froze. The air there felt different. Colder. Empty. She shook her head urgently and waved her hands, trying to catch the child's attention. He only giggled and kept running. Nearby adults assumed she was creating another unnecessary scene. One attendant even reached to escort her outside. Then the final silver thread above the arch disappeared. The paper wolf floated across the threshold. Without allowing herself time to think, Elara followed. The familiar agony gripped her throat as she forced air through vocal cords that had remained nearly silent for years. The words emerged fragile, trembling, and almost impossibly gentle. "Ethan, stop. Come back to me." The little boy halted instantly. He turned as though he had recognized a beloved voice carried through a dream. Smiling, he ran straight into Elara's waiting arms just as a faint shimmer rippled across the ancient doorway before quietly dissolving into harmless silver dust. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. Most witnesses noticed only an unusual draft sweeping through the corridor. They assumed the child had simply wandered too far. Elara dropped to one knee, hugging the frightened boy until his breathing steadied. Tears filled her own eyes, not from fear, but from shock. She had spoken his name. She had truly spoken. Across the hall, Rowan stood perfectly still. Every syllable had reached him with absolute clarity. Not a whisper. Not an illusion. Her voice carried a resonance unlike anything he had ever heard, warm enough to calm instinct itself while stirring something ancient beneath the stone. He stepped forward without realizing he had moved. As Ethan's grateful parents hurried over, unaware of what had nearly happened, Rowan looked at Elara with growing certainty. She had not merely found her voice. She had awakened something that had been waiting for her to speak. News of the strange moment in the western corridor spread through Moon Hall within minutes, but the story changed each time it was repeated. Some claimed the child had simply become frightened. Others insisted the lights had flickered because of an aging electrical system. By the time the rumors reached the banquet chamber, Elara's voice had already disappeared from every version except one. Rowan refused to trust gossip. While the pack celebrated another successful mating ceremony, he quietly entered the administrative wing beneath Moon Hall, where every birth, bond, and bloodline had been preserved in both digital archives and handwritten ledgers for centuries. The elderly records keeper welcomed the Alpha King without hesitation and unlocked the restricted vault. Rowan searched for one name alone. Elara Vale. Her digital file appeared ordinary at first. Born 24 years earlier. Parents listed as Daniel and Claire Vale. No unusual medical history beyond severe vocal impairment. Yet something bothered him. The document had been revised 11 years ago. Official birth records were never edited. He requested the original ledger. The keeper hesitated before producing a leather-bound volume wrapped in silver cloth. As Rowan carefully turned the aging pages, he found the same entry. Then he stopped. Someone had scraped away part of the ink by hand before rewriting an entirely different notation. Most of the original words had vanished, but one symbol remained untouched because it had been pressed too deeply into the paper. It was not a family crest. It was an ancient seal used only by the earliest royal wardens. That single surviving mark shattered Rowan's first assumption. He had believed Elara was simply an unfortunate Omega born beneath an old curse. Instead, someone had deliberately altered her identity years after her birth. At the same time, Elara sat alone outside Moon Hall beneath a line of silver birch trees, pressing cool water against her aching throat. For years she had hated her silence, believing it marked weakness or failure. Yet when she replayed the moment she had called Ethan back, another memory surfaced. As a little girl she had once managed to sing a single note before her mother gently covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Do not force your voice," her mother had whispered with tears in her eyes. Not until the right day. Elara had always remembered the fear in that warning, never the tenderness behind it. Now, for the first time, the pieces fit together. Her silence had never behaved like an illness. It had always answered invisible rules, tightening whenever danger approached and loosening only when something hidden needed her voice. It was not stealing her strength. It was containing it. As Rowan closed the ancient ledger, a folded page slipped free from the damaged binding. Across its yellowed surface, written in faded ink that no one had noticed for decades, were 7 unsettling words. The seal opens only when the silent air speaks. Within an hour, fear spread through Silver Creek faster than truth ever could. The lights inside Moon Hall dimmed again. Protective scanners along the western corridor failed without warning, and several ancient runes that had glowed for generations now lay dark against the stone. No one was injured, yet uncertainty settled over the pack like an approaching winter storm. Fear demanded an explanation, and Councilman Victor Hale was eager to provide one. Standing before the gathered elders, he raised his voice for everyone to hear. The disturbances began the moment the rejected Omega defied the sacred ceremony. She spoke after years of unnatural silence, and the wards answered. That cannot be a coincidence. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Mason remained silent, avoiding Elara's eyes, but his silence felt dangerously close to agreement. Victor continued before doubt could grow. If she carries an unknown curse, keeping her here places every family in this pack at risk. Several frightened wolves nodded. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Elara felt every fearful glance like another stone added to her shoulders. She could leave. If she walked away now, the accusations would follow her instead of the pack. She would survive another exile. She already knew how to live with loneliness. But as she looked toward the western wall, she noticed something no one else seemed willing to see. Another line of ancient protection had vanished. The weakening wards were spreading. If they continued to fail, every wolf inside Moon Hall could eventually lose the barrier that had guarded the territory for centuries. Rowan stepped forward at last, and the room immediately fell silent. His voice remained calm, carrying authority without anger. Fear is not evidence. His gray-blue eyes settled on Victor before moving across the council. The records I have reviewed raise serious questions about Miss Vale's past. Until those questions are answered, no one here has the right to declare her guilty. Victor stiffened. Your Majesty, surely you are not asking us to trust the very person standing at the center of this disaster. Rowan looked toward Alara instead of answering him. He neither ordered nor pleaded. Only she knows what she sensed when the wards weakened. Only she can decide whether to walk away from those who rejected her or remain and tell us what she believes is happening. The choice belonged entirely to her. Every eye in Moon Hall turned toward the woman they had humiliated only hours earlier. Alara's throat still ached from speaking Ethan's name, and she knew another attempt could awaken whatever had been sleeping inside the ancient seal. She could protect herself by leaving before the blame hardened into judgment. Or she could risk everything to warn the very people who had never once believed her. After one long, quiet breath, Alara stepped away from the open doors leading to freedom and turned back toward the failing western ward. Alara walked slowly toward the western arch while uneasy whispers followed every step she took. She ignored them and focused instead on the stone itself. The ward had not failed at random. Every darkened rune formed part of a repeating pattern, one her mother had once traced with gentle fingers across the margins of an old storybook. Alara knelt and brushed away years of dust from the floor. Hidden beneath the polished marble was a faint silver line that no one had noticed because someone had deliberately covered it with fresh sealant. She pointed toward the concealed mark before looking at Rowan. He understood immediately. Without a word, he ordered the maintenance records brought from the facility office. Minutes later, the dates matched perfectly. The western corridor had undergone unnecessary restoration only 6 months earlier under Councilman Victor Hale's direct authorization. Rowan's expression remained steady, but several elders exchanged uneasy glances. Victor quickly defended himself, claiming routine repairs, yet Alara shook her head. With careful hands, she rearranged 3 ceremonial lanterns until their light crossed the hidden symbols exactly as the ancient pattern required. Nothing happened. She closed her eyes. The pain in her throat returned, sharp but familiar. She understood now. The runes did not answer volume. They answered intention. Taking one slow breath, she spoke only 5 quiet words. Return to your first promise. Her voice barely carried beyond the archway, yet the buried silver line awakened beneath the stone. One by one, the surrounding runes shimmered back to life, not in a violent burst, but like stars emerging after heavy clouds drifted away. A warm pulse spread through Moon Hall. The cold emptiness vanished. Parents instinctively relaxed as the invisible pressure lifted from the air. Victor stepped backward, unable to hide his surprise. His earlier certainty dissolved into visible panic. The concealed sealant had not protected the ward. It had interrupted it. Rowan looked toward Alara with quiet admiration rather than triumph. As the last rune settled into its steady glow, she swayed from exhaustion. Before she could lose her balance, Rowan crossed the final steps between them and gently steadied her by her forearm. His grip was careful, offering support without possession. You do not have to prove your worth to deserve being heard, he said softly, making certain only she could hear. Alara looked into his gray-blue eyes and, for the first time in years, found no pity there, only respect. The moment lasted only seconds before a royal technician hurried across the hall carrying a tablet with a pale face. Your Majesty, he said quietly, the Western Ward is active again, but every monitoring system across the Northern Territories has just reported the same impossible alert. Rowan accepted the tablet and read the flashing message twice. The restored ward had awakened something far beyond Silver Creek. Every ancient seal connected to the old network had begun responding to Alara's voice. By sunset, the truth about the damaged ward had spread across Silver Creek, but truth could not outrun the law. Councilman Victor Hale had been stripped of his authority pending a royal investigation, and the elders reluctantly admitted that Alara had saved Moon Hall instead of endangering it. None of that erased the judgment already entered into the pack registry. Under the ancient covenant code, once an Alpha publicly rejected an Omega before the assembled pack and the council sealed the record, the bond could not be restored. Unless another pack claimed her before dawn, Alara would become packless the moment the first sunlight touched the valley. Mason stood outside Moon Hall watching workers relight the ceremonial lanterns she had restored. Every familiar corner reminded him of the moment he had chosen pride over patience. He finally found Alara near the eastern gate, where she quietly folded the small blanket Ethan had insisted she keep. For several seconds, he could not speak. "I was wrong," he admitted at last. "I believed what everyone expected me to believe. I thought your silence made you weak." Alara met his eyes without anger. She simply listened. Mason swallowed hard. "If I could take back what I said." His voice faded because they both understood he could not. The law had already moved beyond regret. Rowan approached with 2 royal guards who respectfully remained several steps behind. His expression was composed, but there was unmistakable resolve beneath it. "As Alpha King, I can delay enforcement while the altered birth records are investigated," he said. "I can also place you under royal protection until the council reaches a final ruling." The offer stunned everyone nearby. Mason lowered his head, realizing that the woman he had rejected was now being offered the protection of the highest authority in the territories. Alara closed her eyes for a brief moment before gently shaking her head. She appreciated Rowan's fairness more than she could express, but she knew what accepting immediately would become in every whispered conversation. They would say the broken Omega survived only because the king pitied her. They would never believe she had stood on her own. She took the small notebook she always carried and wrote carefully before handing it to Rowan. "I do not want to be rescued as a victim. If I have a place in this world, I want to reach it by walking there myself." Rowan read the sentence twice before folding the page with quiet respect. He did not argue. He simply inclined his head as one equal acknowledging another. Before the eastern horizon could brighten, Alara stepped beyond the boundary stones alone. Behind her, Silver Creek disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the trees of the forbidden forest stood silent beneath the moon until a single deep howl rolled through the ancient pines, powerful enough to stop every heartbeat that heard it. The road beyond Silver Creek narrowed into a quiet trail lined with towering pines, their branches swaying beneath a sky washed in silver moonlight. Alara did not look back at first. She carried only a weathered backpack, her notebook, and the steady rhythm of her own footsteps. Behind her, the stone boundary marked the place where she had lost a pack but somehow found herself. As the eastern horizon hinted at dawn, voices called her name. She turned slowly. Dozens of wolves had gathered along the boundary stones. The same elders who had questioned her. The parents whose frightened eyes had avoided hers. Even the young warriors who had laughed when Mason rejected her stood in silence. No speeches were offered. None could erase what had happened. Instead, one by one, they lowered their heads. It was the oldest gesture of respect in the Northern Territories, reserved for those who had protected the pack at great personal cost. Alara felt no triumph. Only a quiet sadness that such understanding had arrived after it could no longer change her path. Ethan broke free from his mother's hand and hurried forward just far enough to place the folded paper wolf into Alara's palm. "Thank you," he whispered with a smile. She answered with the smallest nod. Before tucking the little toy safely into her pocket. When her eyes searched the gathering one final time, they found Mason standing apart from everyone else. He did not ask forgiveness again. He simply bowed his head deeper than the others, accepting that some mistakes remained beyond repair. Rowan was nowhere to be seen. She had hoped to thank him, even if only with a written note, but the Alpha King had departed before sunrise without ceremony, leaving no royal escort behind. For a brief moment she wondered if she had imagined the quiet respect she had seen in his eyes. Then she noticed something tucked beneath the strap of her backpack. A folded map marked only with a single silver path leading north. No signature. No explanation. She smiled faintly. He had found another way to help without taking away her choice. Drawing a slow breath, Elara stepped across the final border marker into the ancient forest. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. She followed the narrow trail until a tall figure emerged from the morning mist ahead. Black coat. Dark hair. Gray-blue eyes reflecting the first light of dawn. Rowan had not left after all. He had simply chosen to wait where no one else could decide for her. Before Elara could lift her notebook or offer the gratitude filling her heart, Rowan's calm expression hardened with unexpected urgency. "The one who weakened the ward was never working alone," he said quietly. "And now the people hunting the ancient seal know exactly who you are." The forest fell silent as Elara realized that leaving her pack had not ended her story. It had only brought her face to face with the first enemy waiting beyond the trees.